Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Walaikum assalam.
How are you doing, Nawal?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Kind of nervous. How are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. I'm a little nervous too, but we can be nervous together,
Inshallah.
inshallah.
Yeah, we'll make it. We'll be okay.
So, what are we talking about today?
Why don't you start with introductions?
Yeah, let's go for it. So, this is Nawal. Nawal works as a crisis counselor for a prominent mental health organization in Canada. She avidly is involved in the community, developing youth programs, mashallah, and is also Yaqeen Institute ambassador, which is where we met, alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
She was born and raised in Karachi and moved to Canada 3 years ago after getting married.
Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. And this is Madiha. She's the youngest of 4 siblings. She comes from a big family, mashallah. She's
Very
a proud
big.
aunt of 8 nieces and nephews.
Mashallah.
She comes from a big, loving Pakistani Indian family. She's born and raised in Canada. She traveled all around the world to gain knowledge, study religion, and have various volunteer experiences. She's currently working as a project manager and creates and facilitates programs working with the elderly. She's the Yaqeen Institute ambassador, which is again where we met. And she's always looking for ways to bring people together through the community, and is always advocating for different causes. So yeah, you'll find Madiha in the advocacy or anything that involves the community. You'll find Madiha there, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Wow, that was a nice intro, Noel.
You're welcome.
So I guess when we got together, we wanted to talk about what was it that we wanted to discuss today and kind of share, I guess, with our fellow sisters is coming back to the community.
Yeah.
How it's so embedded in our religion. And not that the community needs us, but actually we need the community.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the framework that's missing in a lot of our youth today, even in a lot of the adults, right? Like community work is not just for the youth, it's for everyone.
Absolutely.
And it's not that the community needs us, it's that we need it so much more than they need us, subhanAllah. And so, how are we going to deconstruct or deduce that? What are the Islamic principles behind that? So inshallah, that's what we're going to be covering today. This is what we talked about.
Yeah.
But before we get into the nitty gritty, I have a question to ask you.
Go on.
Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
If you were to die tomorrow, what would you want to be remembered as?
That's a hard question, but it's a good one.
It's deep.
Yeah. I guess it's important, right, to always come back to that question. I think I would want to be remembered as kind, empathetic, and I would want people to leave feeling an absence of the safe space that I created for them.
Beautiful, subhanAllah. Yeah.
But you? What would you want to be remembered as?
I think before I give you my answer, just to kind of, being kind, empathetic, those are hard things to achieve. I feel like people, we say these words like it's just so easy. But being good in this dunya and having those traits holistically and to its max is very hard.
It is hard.
It's a lifelong journey, I feel like, to be super kind and to be empathetic and to be honest. So
it's a journey.
It's a journey. Yeah. And it's a lifetime, and it's multiple experiences of making mistakes, of, learning, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala putting you through hardships to gain those attributes. Yeah, that's beautiful. SubhanAllah. What do I want to be remembered as? This one's a hard one too, because you want to be remembered as everything and anything.
Yeah.
But for me, I would say I just want people to remember me as that was the girl who had a very strong relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Her connection to Allah was inspirational. It was that's what I want to be remembered as. And I was thinking about it, what's my legacy? What do I want to leave behind? Do I want to build a masjid? Do I want to build some type of institution? And then it was actually, I read the Productive Muslim book. And he said something, Muhammad Faris, he said, as long as you want to do things, but you want Allah to accept it.
That's very true.
So you can have a masjid, you can have an orphanage, you can have this, you can have that, but what if Allah doesn't accept it? So I guess what I'm trying to say is I just want to do as much as I can, and I hope that Allah accepts it. And in order for me to get there, my focus is my relationship with Allah, with pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just trying my best to fight anything that comes in the path of taking me or deterring me away from that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I want to be remembered as.
I think that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. Just the fact that, we sometimes tend to forget that the preface to all of this is the acceptance from Allah.
Yeah.
Because if there's no acceptance from Allah, what is the point?
Exactly.
And
what
it's
is
in
the
vain.
point? Yeah.
It's in vain. And if that's not our main intentionality behind things, then maybe our intentions are misplaced.
100%. Intention's hard too, right? Like what's
Intention
your
is hard.
being like when people say do things for the sake of Allah, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's so easy, you just roll it off your tongue. But it's hard.
It is hard.
You have so much noise, you have so much going on, and to be sincere is tough. And I think someone said this to me. I think I heard a sheikh say this, and it like really changed the way I look at sincerity. And he said, being sincere, part of it is you don't even know if you're being sincere. Like you're struggling to be sincere. And that hit me because I guess if you did know you were sincere, then you would assume that Allah accepted it, but you don't know.
You don't know.
You're always in like this, you're always on this, I don't know, kind of page or I don't know, stance.
Yeah. Just like, Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba.
Yeah.
And then read Rabbana taqabbal minna innaka anta as-sami'ul alim because he was still looking for Allah's acceptance. Like he did such a pivotal construction for the Islamic generations and history to come.
Yeah.
And yet he was seeking Allah's acceptance because he didn't know.
SubhanAllah. And if the prophets
they didn't know, then I mean, who are you and me?
Yeah, we gotta be careful. We gotta be mindful. We gotta be cognizant.
Absolutely.
I think
cautious optimism. I think is,
good balance of like fearing Allah, but loving Allah too, because both are needed.
So I guess that kind of leads me to what I was thinking of asking you is, who is Allah to you?
Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to me? I'm gonna be honest. I feel like that's not even like a one-word answer. It's to me, he is like my best friend. And my whole life is figuring out who my best friend is. I know like there's my life journey is going to be unlocking different layers of his names. Because there's some names that I have down with yaqeen. I'm like, yeah, he is the most wise. Yeah, he is perfect. He is the one who mends, like all these names. But there's some names that I ought to still figure out. And so he is my best friend. I believe in him. I know he has my back. I love him. And I know he loves me. I fear him. But I have so much more to figure out. My love journey with him is inshallah, till the end for me. So that's what Allah is to me. Who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to you? Right? It's deep.
It is deep.
Okay. Answer that?
I think I'm going to start with the name of Allah that I feel most connected to. And that is just Rabb. Like that's the one. Because to me that Rabb describes it. Rabb and Wali, I think those are the two.
Protector.
Sure. Guardian. Is just nothing else in the world maybe making sense, but he is the pillar.
SubhanAllah.
That makes sense. That gives meaning, that gives understanding, that rationalizes.
SubhanAllah.
Because coming from a mental health background and working in mental health as well, you tend to be very acutely aware, because of your own training and your profession, to people's struggles. And the more you see of that, and I mean, at the moment, we are obviously in a time where we're observing the ultimate struggle that, the Palestinian people are going through. May Allah make it easy for them.
Ameen.
And you recognize the fact that there's so much difficulty in the world, and there's so many layers of complex difficulty in most people's lives that it really doesn't make sense till you have Allah as part of the equation to rationalize it.
SubhanAllah.
So honestly, even like the whole paradigm of mental health, it to me personally, as a practitioner, it doesn't make sense till you have Allah as part of the equation. Because how else do
100%.
you justify or rationalize the trials that people go through? So I guess that brings me back to my point. Who is Allah to me? Allah is the guardian. He's the answer. He is the rationale behind everything in this world. He's the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. He's always the right answer.
He's always
Even
the
when you
answer.
don't get it and you can't comprehend it, he's the answer.
Yeah. Absolutely.
SubhanAllah. I guess that leads us to the first topic that we really want to dig deep into is, I feel like before we even talk about how important community service is and how it's so embedded in our religion, is I think you got to start from basics, which is, you know, how do you love Allah, or how do you build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like if you want to serve others and you want to serve others' rights and have a healthy framework about it, you got to know who your Lord is.
Yes.
You got to know who your creator is, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start there, right? Like how do we build that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially me being born and raised here, you coming from a different country, migrating here, right? We can share and exchange different perspectives and share our experiences so that it can resonate with a lot of people listening to this podcast today. But I guess I'll start off with the question going into the segment of knowing Allah, to love Allah. How did you build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or how do you advise others to build relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who are maybe struggling or are, you know, lacking and they're looking for ways to get closer to him?
So I think the way that I was taught or guided to develop that relationship has a huge part in the way that my mother, alhamdulillah, guided me to that. And her, like what she taught me was very simple. She was just like, just sit and talk to Allah. That's as simple as it was. Her thing was just talk to him. Tell him what's going on. Tell him what you did wrong. Tell him what you're fearing. If you're angry about things happening in your life, tell him first. If you don't understand his rules and his regulations and why you have to do things a certain way, talk to him about it. If you're pissed at your mom, talk to Allah about it. Whatever is going on in your life, let that be the first point of connection that you have.
I love that.
So it was always like, okay, well, first I'm going to talk to Allah about it. I'm going to vent to him. And then I'm going to go to my mom and vent to her about my siblings. Or I'm going to go to a friend and vent to her about what happened in school, what my mom did. You know? So it was, I think from very early on, there was a dependence that was created. And that dependence was in the sense of understanding the fact that you can go to anybody else and they may be able to provide you solutions, but the ultimate solution is with Allah. And the ultimate peace is with him as well. So your first point of contact needs to be him. And I think it was really interesting now that I reflect on it as a, 26-year-old, is being really young and I remember being 12 years old and literally sitting in my bed and complaining to Allah about Allah. And I remember how that was seen as something so okay to do at a young age, was that I think I was complaining about something like, I think I wasn't allowed to go somewhere. And it was because my parents said they didn't think like Islamically it was okay.
Typical 12-year-old.
So I was complaining to Allah, why is it that, you made these rules so I can't go to XYZ and all my friends can go and blah, blah, blah. But now that I think about it, I'm like, that was actually such a healthy thing to do because that was even when you're in a place of not understanding his rules, you are still going back to him. So that connection isn't being compromised. And then you create that dependence from such a young age where you see him as your, like you said, best friend.
Yeah.
So I guess my answer would be, how do you build that connection with Allah? How do you build that relationship? Through dependence. Through vulnerability. Communication. Just like you would in a relationship with a friend or a family member. You invest that time. And part of that investment of time is making sure that you have no judgments there. You have no barriers there. You're not hiding anything back. You're just being yourself and understanding the fact that Allah accepts you as you are in that moment. So I think it's also building a relationship with Allah of dependence and kindness, knowing that He is the most kind. And yeah.
SubhanAllah.
I hope that made sense.
It
Sounded like a
did.
long loop.
No. I think we often try to explain things like 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
But humans are so complex.
No, they are.
And we're all over the place. And so, different variables lead to the same outcome often.
Absolutely.
Right? There's like a million ways to get to the answer, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no. And when you were talking about communication, for me, when I talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I talk to him first before I go delegate or discuss or communicate with anyone, I find that one of the wisdoms of talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and talking out loud is I hear myself.
Yeah.
I hear what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, Madiha, that's not right.
No.
Or hey, you got to watch your tongue here. Or, your perspective on this could be faulty. Yeah. Right? So I love that you talk to Allah first, and may Allah bless your mother and reward her, because what a beautiful thing she taught you.
Yeah.
To talk to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before you talk to anyone else. Yeah. It's like you have a conversation with yourself too. Yeah, subhanAllah. So when I'm making dua to Allah, I'm talking loud, I have my emotions, and then when I go talk to the person I need to talk about, who I made dua about, I feel much more
composed,
regulated, composed, because I'm like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heard me, I talked to him, but also I heard myself, and I'm like, whoa, this can't be said. You can say this in a nicer way, or so. They say, and communication is key. Yeah. But the key to communication is Allah. Yeah. Right? To the point of communication is you need the other person to comprehend. So if they're not comprehending what you're saying, you're not really communicating. Yeah. Right? Or at least you're not being emotionally intelligent about it. Yeah. So I feel like having that discussion with Allah helps you get there in the best way that it can. Right?
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Great. Madiha and I always, whenever we're having one of our conversations, we go into a little bit of a thought bubble afterwards where we get quiet and just reflect on what we're saying.
We're whoa.
And I feel like we're going to go into that right now, but we're on a podcast, so we can't do that.
That's the point, right? That's our friendship. It's it hits the deep roots of our brains and our hearts, and then we gotta sit in silence and process. Yeah. So if we are silent,
that is why
we're just digesting processing. SubhanAllah. Yeah. It does really start with relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It really does. I have been working in a couple institutions for the last couple of years. And even the quality of volunteers, you can tell very quickly, because actions speak loud, right? Words are still loud. They're important, but actions are louder. And so you can tell which volunteers are, do I want them again for the next program, And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you do things for the sake of Allah, it shows in everything. It really does. It shows in the way that you serve the community. It shows in the way, in your ethics, in your morals, in the way you communicate, in your sacrifices, right? Having sabr, or, speaking up, or, it shows in everything. But it starts with Allah.
So do you think that's the answer to operating as a collective, is to keep Allah at the forefront?
I think to start at the collective, you got to start at the individual. Okay. Right? The way, for example, in order to be honest with others, you got to be honest with yourself.
Agreed.
In order to be kind to others, you got to be kind with yourself. The way you treat yourself often is actually projected with how you treat others. Right? So I think before we even go to collective, it's yourself. And we see that in Islam, right? Don't concern yourself with things that don't concern you.
Absolutely.
Right? Or, don't, if you want justice around you, you got to be just to yourself. Right? If you don't want oppression around you, you got to not oppress yourself. Right? And so what do we mean when we say don't oppress yourself? You got to pray. You got to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made your heart. And so if you're not worshiping him, if you're not giving your heart the fuel it needs, you're serving an injustice to yourself.
Madiha, how about I take this a step further? Okay. What if, instead of just you as a person, the microcosm, is that the word? Microcosm
lens, the micro lens. I don't know what words you're saying.
The micro lens.
Help, yeah.
Let's just micro lens. The micro lens by which that you extend into the collective is actually your family. So
I think
you go on.
What's your question though? I'm gonna let you finish the question.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know how you said that we have to look inwards, and our relationship with ourselves determines our relationship with the collective or with others. But how about we take that a step further and look at the relationship with our families as being a reflection or a possible training ground for the way our relationship is going to be with the collective in the communities and societies.
Everything you're saying to me is like music to my ears. Like, you're right on the nail in terms of, before, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought us into a family unit, and they totally are our training grounds for the outside world.
Absolutely.
Because you have so many different types of relationships, so many different dynamics in your household, right? Like, you have your mother, your father, you have a sibling who's younger, older, you have a grandma, you have a relative, you have people that you align with, you don't align with. Your family is like you said, the training ground. And so what I mean by that is, how else do you practice good character?
Yeah.
How else do you learn to apologize? How else do you learn to communicate? It stems from home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And, you know, I realized the hadith I had quoted before, it was, don't concern yourself with things that don't concern you. But actually, what is more aligned with what we're talking about is, you can't change the condition of a people until you change the condition of yourself. So having, you know, let's say you have parents that aren't super religious, right? Or aren't super practicing. They don't pray 5 times a day, yada, yada, yada. And that really frustrates you. You know, you have to practice, number 1, respect. Number 2, building healthy boundaries, right? That's a whole other topic we can talk about. You know, not judging them, not belittling them, right? Not looking down upon them, but coming to an understanding where we can be at peace, even though we're very different. Yeah. And I feel like if we look at our prophet stories, their biggest tests were like their own family members. Absolutely. Right? Their own fathers. Like, look at the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and his father. Yeah. Right? Muhammad and his uncle. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his uncle, right? Like, even their wives, like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was married to like Abu Sufyan's daughter. Yeah. And Abu Sufyan was a huge enemy of Islam. Right? So it's like, how do we train ourselves? Start at home. How do we be part of the collective outside of our home? Start at home. Yeah. Your character building filter process starts at home. Absolutely.
And you know what? That's hard though.
Hundo P.
And I think as like brown women coming from Desi families, I'm the eldest, you're the youngest. Yeah. But I think we both in our unique families have experienced what it's like to do a lot of the family management.
Yeah. 100%.
And I think that can be said for a lot of people from in our similar situations, that, you know, you learn a lot of things about people, you learn a lot of things about yourself, you learn to develop a lot of patience. Yeah. And it's so tempting sometimes, and I think I see this around me all the time, is to cut yourself off.
Yes, it's the easy answer.
Yeah. It's right? To take some to say that, okay, you know what, it's not my problem.
Yeah. Well, this is what the society here fosters, right? There's this cancel culture. There's this individualistic society that is being basically penetrated in all of our minds. And so we're so susceptible to falling into it. And it's easier, right? Like, it's easy to just, now we have like, it's little things that kind of take you away from the family unit, right? Like having your own car, right? You can just get out when you want, instead of dealing with the uncomfortable tension and talking it out and having that challenging conversation. You can just hop on a bus or call a friend or take an Uber and escape. Yeah. Right?
Or just go on Instagram. Oh, yeah. Start scrolling. You know, so easy to block someone out.
Yeah.
You know? Or block your own emotions out about a situation.
Even like, you know, with the cancel culture, it is incredibly dangerous. Yeah. Because it teaches you cancel culture. Actually, before we even go into that, what is cancel culture?
I guess that it's kind of, I see it as being in a place of conflict. Obviously, I'm not talking about extreme toxic situations.
Yes. Let's talk about like
the average, you know, healthy to mildly unhealthy family unit, which is very common.
Yeah.
Because I mean, every family has its own unique set of problems, and that is just what it is, and that's just the trial their family brings,
Yeah.
right? But I guess cancel culture is kind of, it's an escape route almost, where it's putting someone in the no access category, or cutting them out of your life, or saying that they don't deserve any of my attention or time because they did XYZ.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily like the most balanced or prophetic method of doing things. We're taught boundaries. We know that that's okay, but cutting someone out entirely, or
canceling a person out, canceling a type of people out, canceling a family, like basically cutting the lines.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because what does our religion teach us? It's like, keep the line. No matter how, like, it's even when it's hard, like, keep those ties of kinship. If you read the translation of the Quran, if you don't come from a Fusha Arabic background, all you see time after time after time, it's like, keep those kinship, keep the ties of kinship. That those who will be rewarded will keep the ties of kinship, etc. But like you said, it's hard.
It is.
But
hard.
that's like, we're in dunya.
Yeah.
Dunya is hard.
Yeah.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you in many ways when you keep those ties that are really hard to keep.
Yeah.
In the best way that you can.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean you have to go hug every person and, have a deep friendship or, relationship with them. It's just that you have a relationship.
And some things are out of duty. They don't have to be out of like the depth. You may not want to necessarily do them, but you do them because you got to do them. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, he mentions family before he mentions the orphan, the needy, the traveler. Because that is a priority that's given to family, to your kin, to your parents, to your siblings, to your immediate ones. And they have the biggest right upon you.
SubhanAllah. Yeah. And whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordains like a rule or an obligation, it's not only beneficial for our akhirah, but it's beneficial towards us, right? So when you keep those ties that are hard, which by the way, when you keep those ties for the sake of Allah, like Allah will reward you,
absolutely.
Right? But when you keep those ties, it teaches you character development. It teaches you so many competencies, right? Like sabr, like communication, right? Trusting in Allah, having hope in Allah. So I feel like whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to do something, it's actually what's best for us. Like it's us fulfilling our fitrah. So we just have to keep that in mind, because sometimes you get lost in this, like, I want to do me. This is not best for me. This you do you culture. Like, no, we didn't. This is not what our deen teaches us. And actually, like, you won't be happy at the end of it.
That's what I was going to say, is that family and difficult relationships, while they bring their own set of struggles, they also give you a lot of support.
Yeah.
They give you something to rely on. They give you like that nest that you have, that you feel like you belong to. Like, just the fact that we are living in a society that is very individualistic. But then you look at the epidemic of loneliness.
Oh gosh. It's it's huge.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And working in a position where I do get a lot of individuals who are in crisis situations, most of the time it's loneliness. It's isolation. They don't have access to family or friends. They don't have a single person in that moment that makes them feel like life is worth living. Or if someone is going through a bad mental health space, a lot of the times it's because and I'm not saying it's obviously self-inflicted, but just to give you a little bit of context, is that a lot of the times these things are caused by societal loneliness. It's isolation. And we, of course, have our own part to play in that. Is, when we meet someone at the masjid and we don't take their contact number and we don't try to facilitate a connection, we're part of that epidemic of loneliness. But sometimes we bring it upon ourselves as well through that cancel culture. Obviously, having said this, I'm not talking about extreme toxic situations. Those have their own place and their own set of rules and conversations to be had. But we're talking about the average family, the average situation.
Yeah.
But you're telling me about this book about loneliness. Like, what is it called?
This is called The Lonely Century. And this book deconstructs everything you can know about loneliness pretty much,
Okay.
and how our society contributes to loneliness.
Mhm.
So I really recommend everyone to read it, right? It talks about the vulnerable, it talks about seniors, it talks about our youth, and it talks about how, like, like loneliness brings about more increased risk of being racist and
Mm.
falling into poverty or
Mhm.
falling into arrogance, right? So it's an amazing read, and I really recommend everyone to read it, and it makes you reflect on a lot of things. But when I read that book, I just remember comparing it, or not comparing it, but realizing how Islam fights all of this, right? Like the right to take care of your neighbor, right?
Mhm.
The obligations put upon you. Like
Yeah.
we're so, Islam is so for the collective. This is something actually my teacher, my Halakha teacher, taught me. She's amazing. And the first thing she said to me that really pierced my heart and my brain, to be honest, like my aql and my intellect, was Islam is for the collective.
Yeah.
Like it's all about, if you even break things down, like what are sins? It's a sin to lie, it's a sin to cheat, it's a sin to steal. These are sins that hurt people.
Mhm.
The prophet was brought down for what? To perfect what? Character.
Yeah.
Character is associated with people.
Yeah.
If you're on an island and you're by yourself, what does it matter what your character is? Like the community and the collective is what Islam is all about.
Yeah. You are in reference to the other. Yeah.
SubhanAllah, right? Like, and your purpose in this dunya is to be a representative of Islam, and you can't do that if no one's around you.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we put ourselves in this bubble and we isolate ourselves,
Mhm.
right, we're susceptible to so many things, but the thing that you are most susceptible to is shaitan.
Mhm.
I think I read this in this Imam Ghazali book. He talks about pride and arrogance, and he says the one who is alone is like shaitan is like the wolf and you're the sheep.
Mhm.
Like he's just gonna go after you because you're so vulnerable.
Mhm.
You're so susceptible. The whispers are loud.
Yeah.
And it's what and it's the environment, it's the people around you that can often save you,
Yeah.
right? Provide you that comfort.
Mhm.
So I feel it is especially for like the youth, it's and for being born and raised in an environment where individualistic society is sold to us like every day. We have to be more mindful of not falling into that, because it's going to not only hurt us but hurt our units, hurt the people that we are attached to or the family that we're a part of. Yeah. And as someone who has, after university I moved out and I lived on my own for a bit, some like with roommates, sometimes not with roommates. It was tough.
Yeah.
It was really tough.
Yeah.
And now I know, like, but that led me to understand Islam is like, that's why when my teacher said Islam is for the collective, I got it, because I was like, being alone doesn't feed you in any way, especially in your relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah. Makes you very a lot of the times it makes you self-serving.
Yes.
Because you're the only person that you are looking after, or you're the only person to be catered to.
And that's easy.
And that's easy.
Taking care of yourself is easy.
Yeah.
It's the being with others and taking care of others that makes it hard. But that's where
also
your
the most
character
rewarding. Yeah.
Most rewarding, but also that's where you build yourself.
Yeah.
That's where you get your reward.
Mhm.
That's where you make sin and you ask for repentance. That's where you learn how to apologize. Like all these things is with people.
Yeah.
So you cut people out, you're cutting yourself out from a lot of good.
Absolutely. And, I think we have a tendency to glamorize isolation.
Mhm.
But I was reading this really interesting study that was published in a scientific journal called PLOS Medicine. And they're talking about how loneliness has such far-reaching impacts on your health that it's comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
I believe it.
So because it
believe
leads
that.
to so much, the isolation leads to a risk of heart disease, cognitive decline, depression, and so many other things.
I 100% believe that. Working with seniors.
Oh yeah, you had that experience.
Yeah, and they're alone. And this book actually led me to learn more about seniors, and now I work with them, subhanAllah. Like they're so vulnerable. I feel like they're a forgotten
segment of
population of society, right? And so there's more than ever, like alone, lonely seniors who
Yeah.
are widowed, who are sick, who are disabled in some form or way, and they don't have family helping them.
Yeah.
And like that's pretty sad on not on them, but on us,
Yeah.
on the families. Like what happened to taking care of one another,
Yeah.
right? Allahu alam, we don't know what the scenario is, right? There's, like you said, like there's always extreme cases,
Mm-hmm.
but like we have a duty as Muslims to take care of the vulnerable
Yeah.
in our society. And I feel like seniors, we focus so much on youth that seniors are forgotten.
Yeah.
And they need us. And they're more, anyone can die at any time, but they're more at risk, right? And they need dawah services too. And
Yeah.
they need, all these different resources. And so we just got to be mindful. And speaking of, elders and alone, like our religion teaches us, like I said, Islam is for the collective. And when you deduce and look at the rulings of certain things, like there are more angels when you go pray in a congregation.
Jamaat, exactly. Yeah.
When you go visit the sick, it's like you're with Allah subhanahu
Yeah.
wa ta'ala. Like literally, there's if you really analyze our deen, it's like the more reward with the more people.
Yeah.
Right? Like one of the best actions is to learn knowledge and then teach it.
Yeah.
Teach who? Teach people. Right? Not to go and sit in your room and
implement that.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? So yeah, this whole individualistic culture, society, we need to number one, see where we're at. And a good way is to look at how you are with your family, how you are in your relationships. Yeah. Are your relationships deep?
Yeah.
Or do they have depth?
Yeah.
Are they surface level? Why? Why are they surface level? You got to analyze things, right? And then
a question to that is, like an indicator that you can give for yourself is, are you there for people only when you need them?
True.
Are you there for people when you feel like you're receiving no benefit in return? What is your relationship with them then? Where are you at exactly?
It's really important to have a mentor or mentors in your life, right? To kind of ask questions, who you trust. Feel like what helped me a lot was having my mentors in my life to kind of guide me on the path that I want to go on, that I want to choose, but also keeping my relationship with Allah strong at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you feel like your mentors guided you in that?
Well, how do I feel like my mentors guided me? When I have those moments that I couldn't understand what was going on around me, they were there, to like sit down and talk things out. Yeah, and to explain and like our elders, like our seniors, even not our seniors, but like people who are a couple years older than us, that could be our mentors, for example, they have wisdom, right? There's a reason we respect our elders. They have a lot of experience and they can teach you stuff, right? And so, the concept of family and relationships, etc., you learn.
Yeah.
That this is what life is about. This is what family is about. Sometimes you just have to pick and choose your battles, and so alhamdulillah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so true that the thing about picking and choosing your battles is there are going to be times where your ego is on the line. Your self-pride is on the line. Your sense of self may be challenged as well.
100%.
But that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes we are seeking all the justice in this world. But we won't always get that. Especially with relationships. So you could be working in any situation, and say you're working in a volunteer organization, you're always going to come up with complicated personalities and egos and conflicts of interests and people wanting to do things for different reasons and lack of trust and all of those things. That's natural, right? Like you can be working in any organization and you will face those challenges. Even within a family unit, you're going to face those challenges. You're going to have it within friend groups. And then in those situations, the question is, do you keep going and doing what you need to do despite those challenges? Or do they become a barrier to prevent you from doing them? And I guess that's like the difficulty that comes with being part of a collective.
Yeah. And I feel like when you are in those predicaments, you can just go back to it, your relationship with Allah. Is this bringing me closer to Him? If it's not bringing me closer to Him, what would please Him? Because not every relationship can bring you maybe closer to Allah.
Yeah.
You could try your best, but some relationships really challenge you.
Fair. Yeah.
But then how do you please him? Okay,
Mhm.
with this person, I have to realize that they're not right now capable of providing this XYZ.
Yeah.
So, I just have to understand that.
Yeah.
Right. But still keep my kinship, still keep my ties. I think there's a difference with like doing things for the sake of Allah and pleasing Allah. Because sometimes you can do things for the sake of Allah and it's easy. But sometimes pleasing Allah is really hard.
Yeah.
So, you just have to talk to yourself. And that's you like communicate with Allah. And you tell him, like, I'm trying. I don't know if this is right. Guide me. Take me to what the decision that is that would make you proud of me, happy with me, please you. But yeah, so I guess, now that we've kind of dissected the individualistic society, the harms of being very individual or very self-centered, once you have, worked on that, then the need for the collective, let's talk about that.
Okay.
Being part of a community that's greater than your family. So we've talked about how it's a training ground. Okay, now how do we go out there in the real world and be part of it? Why should we be part of it? Yeah, so I'm gonna leave there. What do you think?
I think why to be a part of it is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right, in which he talks about that. I'm just going to read it out loud so I don't misquote. Is that a believer to another believer is like a building whose different parts support each other. And then another narration, he said that the believers in their mutual kindness and compassion and sympathy are like one body.
SubhanAllah.
So when one limb suffers, the whole body responds to it with wakefulness and fever.
We're seeing a lot of that now, right? SubhanAllah,
it's a very pertinent time for this hadith.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess we're seeing the merit and the benefit of the collective. And it's heartwarming, to see how the community and the collective has really woken up and joined hands and come together in the face of everything that's going on in Palestine. SubhanAllah. And it really makes us reflect on, it really makes us see even the benefit of having that collective, like seeing so many masajid around us doing qiyams and healing circles and du'as and sermons about the situation, and the organizing of protests and people standing up for each other and the Muslim community coming together is just a testament of how strong we can be if we just come together.
SubhanAllah. We're powerful as an ummah. I think we forgot that. Yeah. And then now we're like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us. Yeah. Like, don't forget how strong you are when you guys are all together. Yeah. SubhanAllah.
Yeah. And not to forget like the power of a single cause.
Yeah.
Power of single intention behind doing what we're doing. And I guess it kind of leads us to our original point that you brought up, was that at the end of the day, it is about for the sake of Allah and pleasing Allah.
SubhanAllah. Yeah.
And I guess that makes the difficulty of a circumstance or a situation feel more worth it.
Yeah. I think when you're going through it alone versus going through it together, the latter makes it more easier.
Yes, it does.
It's like we're all, it pays homage to that hadith you just said. Like, we're all hurting together.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. And the power of like dua and everybody making the same dua about the same thing. Like, you never know who Allah accepts from, right? It helps with strengthening the sincerity, right? SubhanAllah. So yeah.
Absolutely.
That I'm just digesting.
I know, so am I. We're going into like a reflective space. But so I guess my question is for you then, something maybe we can both answer, is given the fact that being part of a community can sometimes be hard and come with its own challenges, how do we draw that line or that balance between serving others, but also placing boundaries that are healthy for ourselves or sustainable?
So I'm going to kind of go all over the place to answer that question.
Okay.
Which I think answers the question itself. And what I mean by that is, I don't think 1 + 1 = 2 with people.
Yeah.
the way I'm going to build a boundary with you is going to be different than the way I build my boundary with my mom or my dad.
Yeah.
Because they're my mom and dad, and you're my friend. Right? Right? Even with gender, right? This could be a brother, that's a sister. So the boundaries are different. Right? I think number one is having that self-awareness, right? Understanding what your strengths and your weaknesses are. Understanding what's right and wrong in Islam, because what's right and wrong in Islam is right and wrong in general.
Yeah.
Right. And then basically after you know yourself a bit more and you're self-aware, then you understand social dynamics and social interactions a bit better. Right. And so I guess number one, self-awareness. Number two, sometimes you have to take a fatwa from your heart. Right. This is something that a sheikh once said, and I didn't get it at first, but then I got put into some situations where I was like, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I took a fatwa from my heart. I'm like, I think this is what's right. I'm going to try my best. You know, sometimes the boundary for you is different from the boundary from her. Right. So you have to kind of mitigate based on who the person is that you're talking to or you're dealing with. And also with boundaries, I feel like it's such a what's that term when the word is like thrown out so frequently, like boundaries, especially with like in the talk,
like a buzzword.
It's a buzzword.
Yeah.
Something that my mentor taught me is boundaries aren't for the other person, it's for you. So if I'm making a boundary, I don't expect you to like
follow.
Follow. The boundary is for me to recognize. I mean, like, okay, this person has triggered me or heightened my, emotions
or brought out a bad part of myself.
Yeah. Exactly. I gotta recognize that and take a step back. I can't expect him or her to recognize my boundary. Like boundaries, I think we got boundaries wrong.
Yeah.
In this whole like phenomenon of understanding and trying to build boundaries. So yeah, just remember that boundaries are for you. Not everyone, like it's for you to recognize the boundary and to have the self-awareness to understand where you need to step back, step in, whatever the case is. And you know what? Like you're put into different dynamics all the time. So it's like you just try your best, right?
Yeah.
Like you get married and then you have in-laws, then you have kids, and and so I don't think there's a one blanket statement, but try your best keeping the Islamic principles in mind and also knowing who you are and what your limit is, because we all have a capacity.
Yeah.
We're not perfect and we're so flawed. And you know what? If you make a mistake, just own it. Say sorry. My bad. Like, I didn't mean to say that, or I was a little emotional here or a little aggressive here, and just apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? I'm gonna take your question and throw it back at you.
No, I think what you said about remembering the fact that the boundaries is for you is a very, very important point and very significant. I think for me, boundaries is also about just keeping your intention in mind. Like know why you're doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
And like you said, it's about self-awareness, Are you doing it because your ego was impacted? Are you doing it because you genuinely feel like there's a need? Is it because it's easier, And I think what's important is understanding the fact that boundaries, you can respect your own boundaries. So for instance, you may have a certain person that maybe brings out a very bad side of you. And your boundary could just be having a mental level of disassociation with them, where you draw that, where you limit your own expectation from them. So that's not necessarily having to do with their behavior or infringing upon their own thing, but that's mentally letting you recognize the fact that I am not going to expect more from this relationship.
Yeah.
I have to do my role in this particular situation, in this relationship, and that I will accept as my duty. But then beyond that, I'm not going to be seeking maybe depth or validation there. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because like you said, every relationship and every circumstance is going to serve a different purpose. And you can't have the same level of depth or camaraderie or openness with every single person around you. Because as human beings, we're all created different. We're not going to gel or get along with everybody. We're going to have people who sometimes are so similar to us or so different that they rile us up or they push us against a wall. And that's okay. But then in those situations, the question is, do we, like you said before, cancel them out, or do we learn to develop the strategies and the boundaries to manage those relationships while also taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You know, speaking of relationships, something that an elder taught to me, and it has since then transformed the way that I look at relationships. And she's like, you know, because we love labels as humans. I'm like anti-label, but you know what? This one I'm gonna bring out the label. She's like, some people feed your mind, some people feed your body, and some people feed your soul. And so in your mind, when you're filtering through your relationships, that's how you can kind of alleviate some of the pain, because you're like, you know what, this person is just, I can have fun with her, but I can't have deep talks with her. So I can't expect that from her. And, you know, people can change in their categories. So, you know, they can be like in the soul sector, but then they move to, you know, mind, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
You know, like people change. That's the other thing.
And I think that's just a normal expectation is to have is, and that's part of managing your expectations, is that no one person is going to be able to serve everything you need from a relationship.
I feel like girls are so susceptible to that. Yeah. We think that, you know, our husbands or whoever it is, like, can be your everything, but it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who can be your everything. Yeah. The moment you put someone as your everything, you have lost the battle. And we have to remind ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our everything, and we use the people in our social setting and our family units to feed us in different ways, but no one person can give you everything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Once you have that framework in mind, like, subhanAllah, like your relationships will be so easy for you. You know, you'll understand that this person's so human and they make mistakes, and, you know, it's easier to accept reality when you understand that, this person can give me everything that I want. Just like you can give them everything. Exactly. You know? Exactly.
And recognizing your own short givings in that sense, or your own limited capacity, is also, it allows for you to then have that empathy for someone else when you recognize your own limitations.
100%.
You know, because if you can't control your own limitations, do you really blame them for? Yeah, exactly.
Like if you can't be happy with yourself all the time, how can you expect someone else to be, right? So it really is starting with the individual, like learning about yourself, etc. And, you know, and now speaking about all of that, like the need for being part of the collective. What are your thoughts on that? Like in terms of, you know, why are we volunteering? What's the point of volunteering? What's the point of joining an Islamic org, or, you know? Yeah.
I guess it's something my teacher once said, where she said that she kind of looked us in the eyes and she was like, you know what? The good work is going to happen with or without you. SubhanAllah. Allah doesn't need you. This organization doesn't need you. You need them. SubhanAllah. And that kind of changed things around, where I was like, well, that is true. Yeah. They're not dependent on me. I am dependent on them for my akhirah. Yeah. For my pleasure of Allah. You know, for my character growth and my community and everything else that I need and get from volunteering. And I think that really changes the paradigm, is that when you recognize the fact that you are not doing them a favor, they are doing you a favor by existing and creating something that you can help out in. And I feel like that kind of takes you to a mindset of service rather than a mindset of entitlement. I feel like that would be my reason for wanting to be in the collective, was so for myself. It's not for anybody. It's for me. Yeah. You know, if someone gets benefit through me, that benefit that they were going to get was their risk. Yeah. They were going to get it from someone else, if not me. The fact that Allah made me that vehicle of passing that on is
a blessing.
It was a gift. The word. Yeah, it's a gift given to me. Exactly. That's the word. Yeah.
SubhanAllah. And like, where else, when I think about servitude and serving the collective, you know, like, I need these good deeds to save me on the day of judgment. Yeah. So, you know, the community is where you can get a lot of those good deeds, inshallah, if you do them with the right intention and you try your best. Yeah. So I love what your teacher taught you. It's so true that they don't need you, you need them. Even that's in everything, like, right? Yeah. Like, even when you're donating, like, you think like you need that, you need to donate more than they need the donation. Yeah. Because who's gonna intercede for you on the day of judgment? Yeah. Right? What are the good deeds that are going to wipe out those bad deeds on the day of judgment? At the end of the day, who are you? You are your good deeds and your bad deeds, and you don't even know what's accepted. Yeah. So you gotta milk the good deeds as much as you can.
You gotta hustle them,
right?
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you gotta search for those opportunities where there's volunteering. You gotta search for those opportunities where there's institutions that need people, and serve,
Yeah.
and do your best doing it, right? Yeah,
and ask a lot to send those opportunities your way.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
You know, my mentor, I didn't find her till I made dua for one.
Yeah.
Right? And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to ask for what we need so that we can get it.
Yeah.
Right? It all starts with dua. Like that's something that Muhammad al-Sharif was a huge fan of.
Yeah.
Like dua is your weapon. Dua is your tool. Dua is your best friend.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're communicating with the creator.
Yeah.
Who created everything and can give you everything that you want. So serving the collective, I guess, if you're struggling with it, if you're looking for opportunities, make dua for it.
Yeah.
And it's not easy either, right?
No.
Like students are needing to bus, right? Some of us are moms, right? You know, men are busy with their full-time jobs or whatever the case is it's not easy, but be part of something.
Yeah. Do something. Make sure there's some portion of your life that you are giving back in, whatever that may be, you know, and then it could be something very, what you consider quote unquote small.
Yeah.
But as long as you have the right intention,
yeah,
you know, whatever Allah accepts.
And what's small for you could be big for me.
Yeah.
And what's big for you could be small for me.
Yeah.
We all have, like, that's another thing with, you know, not comparing yourself, because number one, everyone's different. And number two, like, what Allah accept, we don't know.
Yeah.
So, Allahu Alam.
And everyone has a different role to play in the community.
SubhanAllah.
You know, we have our own unique set of skills.
Yeah.
And things to offer, and we're gonna do different things, and that's okay. And that's what Allah wrote for us, you know, that's a risk for us.
You know, something I'm seeing in the youth is this huge need for everyone to be a leader.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, you know, it's interesting because number one, not like, when did it become not so great to be a supporter? You can't be a leader if you don't have supporters, and if you don't have any supporters, you don't have a leader.
Yeah.
Right. And also, it's not that you want, like, you know, when people come and they're like, I make dua that your child grows up to be a leader. It's like, no, make dua that your child grows up to have good character. Right. And those good character traits will lead them to, inshallah, be a leader if that's what's written for them. But, you know, if you don't get that position that's like super high in the volunteering community or in the Islamic org, like, that's not what leadership is, not the goal. The goal was to just serve and to serve with sincerity and good intentions, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
But there is this thing I'm seeing in the youth where everyone just wants to be a leader, and it's like, I don't know why. I don't know why everyone wants, like, you have to think about that too. Why? Is it because you want the power and the autonomy,
the glamour,
and the glamour?
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, like, if you talk to any leaders in the community, it's hard.
Yeah.
Hard to be an imam. It's hard to be a CEO, and it's a test. It's hard to be a sheikh. You know,
it's hard to keep your intentions straight then.
100%.
Because then you're in the public eye, you're visible.
100%.
Like the fact that Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, cleaned washrooms.
Yeah.
You know, and that was his service.
SubhanAllah. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no work that's beneath anything you can offer.
There's something that Imam Ghazali said in this book, and he said that what increases you in the eyes of Allah decreases you in the eyes of people, and what decreases you in the eyes of Allah increases you in the eyes of people. Right? Power, wealth, status. Right? And I remember reading that sentence, and it took me 30 minutes to understand it, because I was like, what does this mean? And then it made so much sense.
Yeah.
And I was like, we got to remember our focus. Like Mikhail Ahmed Smith, he always talks about, like, you just have to be focused.
Yeah.
And these voices will come and things will be thrown at you, but you just have to remember your end goal. And not to be distracted, you know? And so when you join the collective, often you are distracted because there's much more voices in your mind, and, you know, you have many more relationships and conversations, and things get, you know, kind of messy, but you just have to remember your focus.
Yeah.
And what's your focus? It's pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That's, I think, a really, really good point to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Madiha. And I think this was a really great conversation.
Alhamdulillah.
I feel like we just had one of our coffee chats.
Yes, we totally
recorded.
Did. Yeah.
So that was amazing. And any last words you want to share?
honestly, just jazakallah khair for this opportunity. To do it with with the best friend is awesome, alhamdulillah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept, and hopefully,
Inshallah.
we offered a gem or two that people could walk away from.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
thank you very much.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.